Listen, we need to talk about shadow people. I know, it sounds like something out of a cheesy horror movie, right? But the sheer volume of stories from people claiming to have encountered these shadowy figures is staggering and honestly, more than a little unnerving. We're talking about fleeting glimpses caught in the corner of your eye, or full-on apparitions that seem to defy explanation. Are these just tricks of the light, or is there something more sinister lurking just beyond our perception? Today we're diving headfirst into the darkness to explore 5 truly unexplained shadow figure encounters that are sure to send chills down your spine. So, dim the lights, grab your nightlight, and for goodness sake don't watch this alone. This first story takes us to a typical suburban home where a family's sense of security was shattered by a series of unsettling events. It all started in the basement. You know, that one place in every house that just seems to radiate stay-away vibes? The family had lived in the house for years, and the basement, while always a little creepy, had never been a source of any real fear. That is, until one evening, when the family's teenage son ventured downstairs to grab some extra blankets. As he descended the stairs, he noticed something strange out of the corner of his eye. A dark, indistinct shape seemed to dart across the far wall, vanishing into the shadows beneath the staircase. He froze, heart pounding in his chest, but dismissed it as his imagination playing tricks on him. After all, the basement was dimly lit, and it was easy to mistake shadows for something more sinister. But then it happened again. A few days later, the boy's mother was doing laundry in the basement when she, too, caught a glimpse of the fleeting shadow. This time it seemed to linger for a moment longer, a tall, humanoid form with no discernible features, before melting back into the darkness. The family, now thoroughly creeped out, began to avoid the basement altogether. But the activity didn't stop there. Footsteps were heard coming from the basement when no one was down there, and objects seemed to be moved or knocked over without explanation. Whatever this shadowy entity was, it seemed to be growing bolder, its presence becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Was it simply a case of an overactive imagination fueled by the spooky atmosphere of the basement, or was there something more malevolent at play? The family decided to discuss the strange occurrences among themselves, trying to make sense of what was happening. They even went online searching for similar experiences and possible explanations. Eventually, they decided to call in a paranormal expert to investigate the basement. The expert arrived with various equipment, ready to uncover the truth behind the mysterious shadow. As the experts set up their devices, the family watched anxiously, hoping for answers. The basement, now filled with sensors and cameras, seemed even more ominous. The family waited nervously, their eyes fixed on the monitors as the expert began the investigation. What they discovered would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about their home. Our next encounter takes us to a university dormitory, a place already steeped in its own brand of eerie energy. The old building had seen countless students pass through its halls, each leaving behind their own stories and secrets. Students whispered tales of strange occurrences, of doors that creaked open on their own, and lights that flickered without reason. Unexplained noises echoed through the halls late at night, adding to the building's unsettling atmosphere. But nothing could prepare one student for what she was about to experience. Her name was Sarah, a diligent student known for her late-night study sessions. It was late, well past midnight, and the dorm was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The silence was almost oppressive, wrapping around the building like a heavy blanket. Sarah was up late studying for an exam, the only one on her floor still awake. Her desk was cluttered with textbooks and notes, a testament to her dedication. The dim light from her desk lamp cast long shadows across her room, making the darkness outside her door seem even more impenetrable. As she stretched, taking a break from her textbooks, she felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced down the long, empty hallway that led to the communal bathroom, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. And that's when she saw it. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. At the very end of the hallway, barely illuminated by the dim emergency lights, stood a tall, shadowy figure. It was completely black, devoid of any features, and seemed to almost absorb the light around it. The figure was unnaturally still, as if it were a part of the darkness itself. Sarah froze, her heart racing in her chest. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears. She blinked, certain that her sleep-deprived mind was playing tricks on her, but the figure remained, unmoving, as if watching her. Fear coiled in her stomach, urging her to look away, but she couldn't tear her gaze from the shadowy apparition. The longer she stared, the more real it seemed, as if it were solidifying before her eyes. Gathering her courage, Sarah slowly got to her feet, her eyes never leaving the figure. She took a hesitant step towards it, then another, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. As she drew closer, the figure seemed to flicker, its edges blurring as if it were struggling to maintain its form. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Vanished into thin air, leaving Sarah standing alone in the silent, dimly lit hallway. Shaking and breathless, she hurried back to the relative safety of her room, the image of the shadowy figure seared into her memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had encountered something otherworldly, something that defied explanation. The experience left her questioning the nature of reality, and the boundaries between the known and the unknown. From that night on, Sarah could never walk down that hallway without a sense of dread, always glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the shadowy figure again. And though she never saw it again, the memory of that night stayed with her, a constant reminder of the mysteries that lurk in the shadows. Vanished into thin air, leaving Sarah standing alone in the silent, dimly lit hallway. Shaking and breathless, she hurried back to the relative safety of her room, the image of the shadowy figure seared into her memory. Chapter 3. The Shadow in the Mirror. This next story takes us to a small town where a young woman named Emily had a terrifying encounter with the unknown. Emily was a quiet, reserved person, known for her love of old things, especially antiques. She had recently moved into an old house, filled with vintage furniture and decor which she adored. Emily had always been a bit uneasy around mirrors, a feeling many people share, but she never expected one to become the source of such chilling terror. The antique mirror in her bedroom was particularly unsettling with its ornate frame and slightly tarnished glass. It was a stormy night, the wind howling outside her bedroom window, and the power had gone out, plunging her room into darkness. The storm seemed to grow more intense with each passing minute, the thunder rumbling like an ominous warning. Emily fumbled for a candle, the flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, creating an eerie atmosphere that made her skin crawl. As she went to close her curtains, her gaze fell upon the antique mirror that hung above her dresser. The mirror seemed to draw her in, its surface reflecting the dim light in a way that made it look almost alive. And that's when she saw it. A movement in the mirror that shouldn't have been there. Reflected in the mirror, standing just behind her, was a tall, shadowy figure. It was as if the darkness itself had taken form, looming ominously in the background. It had no discernible features, just a void where its face should have been, and its form seemed to writhe and distort in the flickering candlelight. The figure's presence was suffocating, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. She felt paralyzed, unable to move or even scream, as if the figure had some unseen power over her. She slowly turned her head, expecting to come face to face with whatever lurked behind her, but the room was empty. There was nothing there. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own rapid breathing. Heart pounding in her chest, Emily turned back to the mirror, and to her horror, the shadowy figure was still there, its dark eyes seeming to lock onto hers. It was as if the figure was staring into her very soul, its gaze unrelenting and cold. She quickly extinguished the candle, plunging the room into darkness once more. The darkness felt like a protective cloak, hiding her from the figure's terrifying gaze. Panic surged through her as she stumbled back, her hand reaching for the light switch. Her fingers fumbled in the dark, desperate to find the switch and banish the shadows. The room flooded with light, and when she dared to look back at the mirror, it was gone. The shadowy figure had vanished, leaving Emily to wonder if it had ever been there at all, or if her mind had played a cruel trick on her. Chapter 4. The Shadow in the Woods. This encounter takes us deep into the isolated wilderness, where a group of friends on a camping trip stumbled upon something truly unsettling. They had set up camp near the edge of a dense forest, the towering trees casting long, eerie shadows in the fading light. As night fell, the friends gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and laughter, the crackling flames providing a sense of warmth and security against the encroaching darkness. But as the fire began to die down, one of the friends, Jake, excused himself to gather more firewood. Grabbing a flashlight, he ventured into the woods, the beam of light cutting through the darkness, illuminating the tangled undergrowth and gnarled branches overhead. As he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, an uneasy sensation that sent shivers down his spine. He stopped, shining his flashlight into the darkness, but found nothing, just the dense trees and the rustling leaves. Convincing himself it was just his imagination, he continued on, but the feeling of unease only intensified. And then he saw it. A tall, shadowy figure, darker than the surrounding darkness, standing silently between the trees, its form shifting and wavering as if it were part of the shadows themselves. It seemed to be watching him, its presence radiating an aura of intense cold and malice. Chapter 5. The Shadow in the Bedroom. Our final encounter hits close to home, quite literally. It takes place in the most vulnerable of spaces, the bedroom. A young boy, Ethan, was sound asleep in his bed, his room dimly lit by a nightlight, when he was awakened by a strange feeling. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding in his chest, and looked around the room. Everything seemed to be in order, but the feeling of unease persisted. That's when he saw it. Standing at the foot of his bed, a tall, shadowy figure loomed over him. It had no discernible features, just a dark, amorphous shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. Ethan was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream or move as the figure seemed to draw closer, its presence filling him with a sense of dread he had never known. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing it to be just a bad dream, but the feeling of its presence only grew stronger. Finally, mustering all his courage, he threw back the covers and switched on the bedside lamp. The room was instantly flooded with light, and the shadowy figure vanished without a trace. Ethan scrambled out of bed, his heart racing, and ran to his parents' room, desperate for comfort and reassurance. He told them what he had seen, but they dismissed it as a nightmare, a figment of his overactive imagination. So, there you have it, 5 chilling encounters with shadow figures that defy easy explanation. Are these just tricks of the light? Our minds playing tricks on us in the darkness? Or is there something more to these shadowy apparitions? Look, I'm not saying I believe in shadow people, but I'm not saying I don't believe in them either. It's like Ryan always says, I'm just a guy who went to film school. But these stories, they stick with you, don't they? They make you question what we can truly see and what might be lurking just beyond our perception. Let me know in the comments what you think. Have you ever had a strange, unexplained encounter that left you questioning reality? And if you find yourself home alone tonight, maybe leave the lights on, just in case.